Good evening. Well, we have a little group tonight. What would you like to look at? The powerful spiritual fact is that what is here is not what it is thought to be. It's not what it is said to be. And what it is powerfully other and different than it is generally held to be. What you are is powerfully different and other than what you generally hold yourself to be. Than you can hold yourself to be, because what is here is unthinkable. But very fortunately, what is here is discoverable, what is here is noticeable, what is here is investigatable very, very intimately. So it's possible to discover firsthand, self-verifyingly, what this is, what you are, and fundamentally that it is radically other than you may have thought it is, than the circumstances of what you may have thought is going on here is radically other than you may have taken it to be.
Well, I have a question in regard to that. So, I think it's a question. So I would say that the intimation of that fact that you just outlined, yeah, and I probably speak for many people, but I definitely speak for myself, it's probably been the propelling factor of the search, regardless of its hopelessness or whatever. From being, a teenager with hallucinogens to, winding up in various ashrams or whatever, and so on and so forth. And I'm acquainted with your work and enjoy it very much, or feel the validity of it very much. And also, this is where I don't know if it's really a question. I have a practice that I engage in, sort of Kashmir shave-like kind of deal, that came out of the fact that walking into a certain environment at some point in my life, I had that experience, the one not that experience, but the experience of at least it being more than I thought it was or is, and so on and so forth. And I also recognize that there's a danger not a danger, but there's a kind of a thing where once there's an opening of that kind and it is mysterious and can't actually interpret it and all of that, but nonetheless you're in this sort of structural, institutional, spiritual environment that has advice and practices to form. There's this thing in me that to have that space open there's this sort of hope. And I know it's because of kind of futility built into it, but there's a kind of hope that engaging in the practice, and sometimes the practice itself feels alive in a mysterious way also. Mostly not, but sometimes it does. So I don't know really where I'm going, Peter, with the question, but it's more like I do have an attachment to working that connection. Yeah, and knowing in a way it's also a kind of deadening, seeking orientation as well. That's kind of the opposite of the opening.
Yeah. Well, of course, this is very common. The vision, to whatever degree, that, oh wow, there's something more going on here, this is for real, is of course the great intimation and the great seducer into, wow, I gotta check this out. I need to look into this. Unfortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, but anyway, it happens to be the case that there are many, many spiritual institutions that have all sorts of, more or less intelligent, more or less assembly line approaches to, well, you do this and do that and do this and do that, and you're working, you're building a stairway to heaven or what have you. Which is largely, in my opinion, is largely not productive. Largely because of the way human psychology works. We are indoctrinated in and inclined towards structures and patterns. The very nature of what this actually is doing all structures and patterns, but is intrinsically beyond all structures and patterns. So it's a normal human mode to seize on process, to seize on a structure or a pattern as, oh wow, this is great. So what do I do now? Where's the instruction manual? Where's the map? Where's the template for how to proceed, how to be productive in this area? But unfortunately, again, a direct engagement with this is entirely beyond process. It's not counter process. It just is beyond process. It has nothing to do with process. There may or may not be process present, but the engagement with this has nothing to do with that. So you may be engaged in various intense degrees of process and still touch this, or you may have no process whatsoever and touch this. So
it's a regardless thing. So it's regardless. The touching of this is regardless of any particular.
Well, I try to present what I hope is an efficient and relatively unencumbered approach to this that attempts to bypass much of the pitfalls of the seduction of structure and the seduction of process and all of that we're that we dutifully are so eager to latch onto. Which of course is that this that is here is what is sought already. It is that. And no portion of it is not that. In other words, it's not like there's a very small portion of what is here that is reality, that is the treasure, and there's all sorts of piles of crap of delusion that are somehow, overwhelmingly blocking that. It's not like that. All experience is itself reality. And the experiencing of experience is itself reality. Which includes our psychology. It includes our neuroses. It includes our silliness and our vanity and our being seduced into whatever we're seduced into. And none of that in any way impedes reality itself, because all of that is made of reality. All of that is itself a portal to reality. So the trick is to see what anything is, rather than qualifying, is this process or not? Is this real or not? Is this illusion or not? Is this spiritual or not? Anything that is actual, i.e. experiential, is reality. So you know, the yoga that I recommend is to look at your experience, whatever you're experiencing. You know, it's easier in areas that are relatively unencumbered of, let's say, investment, simply because, you know, we're so used to getting swept up in our investment that we're already off and running, and don't have much wherewithal left over to do much noticing what it is. But even that, even when you're, you know, when you're lost in a compulsive thought, or lost in an emotional reactivity or something, what is that? How is it appearing? What's it made of? Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? What is perceiving it? How is it being perceived? It's the very structural fact of experience itself that is the mystery. It doesn't matter what is being experienced. It does not matter. So you can be doing prostrations and saying sacred mantras and burning incense to your altar, or you can be, you know, taking a big crap in the toilet, you know, after vomiting because you're so badly hungover from your, you know, drinking too much the night before. Same thing. It's all, the one is as real as the other.
Well, they're equally mysterious.
They're equally mysterious. But that mystery is an accessible mystery.
It's accessible.
It's accessible because it is here, or it wouldn't be being experienced. It's already being completely intimately engaged with. The presence of experience is absolutely intimate engagement. Let's say, you know, to be heavy-handed and inaccurate, but nonetheless evocative, consciousness, right now, right here, is, as soon as consciousness experiences something, the consciousness and the something that's being experienced is like this. There's no distance, there's no gap. And the mystery is, what is this consciousness? What is this that's appearing? And what's up with that? And of course, these questions are not answerable logically, but they don't need to be answered logically. They need to be felt, because the feeling of intelligence is an exercise of a profound transcendental intelligence. It's not a linear or rational intelligence, but it's an intelligence which supersedes those. It's the intelligence that enlightenment is made of. So simply by, it's, in other words, becoming an aesthete, just developing or letting yourself settle into your aesthetic sensitivity is the path of the most efficient yoga, the most powerful yoga. Any experience you're experiencing with absolute intimacy and absolute sensitivity to anything that seems, any qualities that it seems to present as, and just drink it in qualitatively. And that very engagement is an exercise of supreme intelligence. And it's not an intelligence you need to do or muster. It's an intelligence that's already there, because that's what it consists of. That's what the very fact of the experiencing consists of. So you're
experientially, it's not being drunk in.
Well, it is. It always is. It's never not being drunk in. It's very paradoxical. You're letting yourself notice what is already the case, always. So it's not even anything you need to do or develop or move into. It's more, look at this incredible richness of color that's miraculously appearing in this field of vision. You know, just wow. I mean, that is it right there. Like, what's up with that? What is this color? What is the perception of it? What is the consciousness? And again, not with asking the questions and expecting answers, but just feeling what's up with that. Just open-endedly. And of course, your answer will not be a resounding answer. It will be a resounding thisness. But the thisness is not nothing. It's most profoundly not nothing. It's most profoundly a fullness and a vitality and a meaningfulness it's beyond the human level. It's completely irrational, but that doesn't invalidate it. On the contrary, that's just what it happens to be. All of our human logic and human value systems are pale, partial shadows of the lusciousness of actual value, of actual meaningfulness, of actual intelligence.
Which is discerned through its incomprehensibility and its mystery.
Yeah. Incomprehensibility is what absolute, intimate, transcendental comprehension looks like.
Yeah.
No, really.
Yeah,
for real.
It's a great sentence. It's also.
Yeah. You know, we invalidate the profundity of our own experience because we keep expecting it to resolve into something that we expect it to resolve into, and that's the mistake. Let it be what it is. Feel the mystery and the openness, and mystery and openness is not a failure. On the contrary, it's a resounding success. It's a resounding result. You know, we think of mystery as being a challenge, a question mark that you know, that begs we want the answer. We don't want the question, but the question is the answer, and not just in some sophistry philosophical sense, in a most profound actual sense.
So, sense to me. So one of my particular sort of symptomatic levels of experiences is it can be a kind of depression, which is sort of the almost the opposite of what you're saying. It's a sort of reducing everything to this sort of drabness and kind of predictability, and also the idea that the sort of idea this won't resolve itself, which in that form of thinking, that narrowing, is kind of a disappointment.
Right, it's being held as a failure.
Being held as a failure. So any recommendations when that feels to be...
All of that mechanism is taking place in an absolute resplendent cornucopia of transcendentality. That's the context within which that happens. I mean, it's like the little kid is saying, "Oh, gosh, there's nothing to do. Life sucks. It's terrible." And it's like, just look around. And, you know, in other words, it's a kind of a self-fulfilling tunnel vision of self-reinforcing, you know, defining it as being this and defining it as being that, and then being pissed off about it because we're stacking the deck against ourselves in the way we define it. But all of that defining is taking place in the context of this undefined. That is, it may be undefined and is in fact undefinable, but that again is not actually a failure. That's not actually an incompleteness. It's the actual nature of what this is. Unresolvability, indeterminacy is the nature of infinity. It's the nature of unlimitedness. Not just in a sense of sophistry or philosophy, but for real. I mean, that's what this is. This is literally made of an infinity, and its qualitative aspect is infinite. And what's infinity look like? It looks like a big question mark. You know, you go looking, and it's not like you don't find. You find too much, but you can't tell what it is. Well, God can't tell what God is either. That's what this is all about. God is looking at itself and going, "What the fuck?" And there's no answer. But it's your consciousness. God is looking at itself as your consciousness, and it's looking at itself as what is showing up in your experience. I mean, again, not metaphorically, literally. And it's already happening. It already is that. So again, it's just a matter of even if part of your mind is defining it as not being that, look that defining is taking place in a context that completely transcends that defining. All defining takes place in the context of the undefinable. You know, the undefinable is never not there. Just because you're busy defining what's going on and getting pissed off about it, the context in which that's happening is all this, which is, and what is it? You don't know. You can't say. But again, in a sense of wow, rather than in a sense of oh shit.
Yeah. Because the disappointment itself is rooted in the idea that there should have been a resolution, there should be an answer or something.
You're defining a result which you did not achieve, and then you're disappointed because you didn't achieve the result that you're defining yourself as that you should have achieved. But says who? You know, you don't, if any result that is known is not a result worth having. And it's certainly not a result that will enlighten. The actuality is intrinsically indeterminate. I mean, literally it is indeterminate. Physicists discovered this, of course, with, you know, indeterminacy principle and all that. You look at what, scientists look at what, try and pin down exactly what's going on with physics and subatomic particles and stuff, and they scratch their heads because it's, well, we know a lot about it, but the closer you look at it, the weirder it gets. And again, that's not a failure. That's actually a result. They're seeing what it is. They're getting it. It's a failure if you think you're supposed to get an answer to the question or an answer to the equation. But the fact that there's no answer is the answer in a very powerful sense. It's just a matter of not defining it, you know, being open to what it actually is rather than defining what you expect it to be and then being disappointed because it doesn't meet your criteria. Reality itself is very subtle, it's very slippery. You know, it allows for, it's like the ultimate Rorschach blot. You can see it as being this and see it as being that and seeing it as being the other, and it will seem to be that. It will seem to support that. It will give you plenty of evidence that your interpretation is right. Just like you look at the Rorschach blot, no, it looks like Marilyn Monroe, it looks like a lion, or it looks like a ice cream cone. And sure enough, it does. But it isn't. It's more than that. It can be seen as that, but it's more than that. Can this be seen as the dull horror of human society and stupidity muddling our way to self-destruction? Sure. You know, but can it be seen as in an infinity of other ways? Yes, absolutely. And none of those ways are true. What the true way is right here. What it really is right here. The Rorschach blot is not, it's not that it's not this, it's that, it's not that, it's this, it's that it's what's there, not the interpretations that you're free associating on it. So this slipperiness makes it very challenging to look into, because you'll tend to see what you expect to see. So the degree to which you have any kind of unconscious bias or presupposition, it will tend to become a self-fulfilling little folly, whatever. But just feel the experience. You know, what is this? You know, where is it? How is this? You know, no answers, but in the no answers, this is what it is. And you know, and there's a profundity there which is actually very obvious once you relax into it. You know, getting used to ambiguity.
Yeah.
It's not a normal human mode.
And partly, I mean, isn't part of this really for search, for a resolution or whatever, or a resolve or an answer. Isn't it generated a lot by fear?
Well, all of those, but fear, it's all generated by definition. The real culprit in all this is definition. Fear is generated by definition. You define a problem. Yeah, you define a problem and you define a result and you define that that result is possible and you define that you don't want that result and all of a sudden you're afraid. But all of the elements that substantiate the fear are defined into existence, free associated on this Rorschach block.
That's true. That's true.
It is true.
So I would have a feeling in the body, actually, like in the morning, waking up, that I immediately label fear, and it's so I guess but whereas I could be more relaxed or interested in seeing what it is.
Exactly.
Which would not be defined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nothing in reality, nothing is definable. As soon as you find anything where you think you know where it is, you're wrong. You're in delusion. You're hypnotizing yourself. You're lying to yourself. Well, you're partializing. It's like a caricature. You're taking something that is an open-ended actuality that is undefinable, and you're taking a partial aspect of it and saying this is what it is.
Yeah. Seems more obvious when it's in reference to thought, and what you're saying feels more obvious to me in reference to thinking, as opposed to some physical sensation, which seems somehow more core.
Well, yeah, but physical sensations are only an issue plus or minus when they're defined. So ultimately it gets down to the same issue. Physical sensations exist. All sensation is actual sensation, but what it is not what you think it is. And you can get these weird sort of feedback loops where you can, like fear, you can define something as being fearful and then feel terror and that tightens up your body and all of a sudden there's all this physicality associated with it, but again, it's taking a bunch of elements which are not really associated and stringing them together into a narrative that is self-reinforcing. But in actuality, if you look at every one of the elements of that, they don't actually exist in the way that the narrative claims. Human orientation strings things together into narratives, and nothing is strung together. Everything just is what it is. There's no attachment, there's no connection, there's no stringing together that is definable. We claim to form coherent wholes out of incoherent, a surplus of information. And this is explorable. You can look at that and see if it's true, And again, even if you're doing that, you're all these kinds of activities and all these kinds of obsessions and focuses are partial, take place in a field of an experiential field which utterly and completely transcends them and is always present. So when you have this whole defined, when you're afraid and all of this, or whatever, you have the whole scenario going and you're all torqued up about it, the sun is still shining. What's up with that? What the hell is life? What's gravity? What's sound?
Well, the core fear is death, and death means, at least the assumption, which again,
it's defined into existence.
Another definition, right? Is the sun won't be there.
Yeah, but no one knows that. You go to sleep and the sun's not there.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
You close your eyes and the sun's not. You're inside and the sun's not there. Yeah. If you look at experience, it's a never-ending cascade of absolutely unique, infinite presentations of experiential characteristics which have absolutely no stability and never repeat.
But go on infinitely, it seems.
Yeah, and then you can't find anything but infinity.
Yeah.
There's no non going on. So going on is a meaningless notion. You can't find an end of anything. You can't find a limit or a boundary of anything. You know, where's the edge of your field of vision? Can you find an edge? Is there a place where it stops? You know, it's very paradoxical. You can be beyond your field of vision, but you can't find an edge.
No, you can't find an edge.
You know, and yet you can be outside your field of vision. Right? You can go to the field of hearing, and the field of hearing is not in the field of vision. But how do you get there? They aren't contiguous. They exist in their own dimensions. But we hallucinate that they're all coherently joined together, and this, you know, there's this nice little coherent package, and it's all connected, and all the beads are nicely on the string. But that's a fantasy, because when you look at the actuality, all you find is a presence of apparent characteristics, and you cannot find any rationale, any way of orienting them or relating them to other apparent presentation of actual characteristics. They're just present. I mean, you know, in terms of defining, which is impossible, the closest I can get to defining this is two characteristics which turn out to be one: presence and radiance. So presence, and the experience is present. You know, and presence is very trippy. You go looking at presence is completely obvious, but you go trying to pin it down. What exactly is presence?
Yeah.
You don't find it. You can't find it.
No,
and yet,
it's like the field of vision thing.
Yeah, and yet it's completely obvious, but you can't find it.
Right.
So, and radiance is a way of expressing this never-ending projection of an infinity of, you know, this endless, infinite spectrum of experiential characteristics, flavors and colors and sounds, and just, you know, just this endless waterfall of an infinity of characteristics that unstoppably shines forth. And presence is always shows up as radiance, and radiance is always present. And beyond that, you can't do shit with it. You can't pull it together. You can't turn that, you can't use that as a building block to do something else. I mean, we pretend we can. That's the whole human arrogance of creating all these narratives and analyses. But they're all pretense. They don't actually exist. Exists, this infinite radiant presence, it bears no relation to itself structurally, or in terms of mechanism, or in terms of...
It bears no relation to itself?
Yeah. I mean, it coexists. If you look at any portion of experience and look at any other portion of experience, you cannot pin down their relationship to any degree. You can't tell where this is with relation to that. You can't tell what it is with relation to that. You can't tell if this is causing that or that's causing this. I mean, it's basically just a coexistence, an infinite, unresolvable coexistence, you know, of presence and radiance. It looks as if, you know, the hip bone's connected to the thigh bone, and gravity works and it's holding us down, and, you know, it looks like there's all of this process. But then you go look at the actual experience, you can't actually find it. It's all circumstantial evidence. Mm-hmm. Things seem to sort of stick together, but then you can't find any actual sticking together. You know, but you know, you have to look for yourself. You know, the power of this begins to show up when you do the math yourself, when you begin to look at your experience and see how slippery it is, see how tricky it is, see how unresolvable it is. And then you get, you know, well, my personality is busy knowing everything and sorting everything out and all of that. That's sort of happening over here, you know, this little sort of sub-mechanism in this vastness of actuality. That is just what? You know, it's just here. And there's no me other than it. When I go looking for me is being strung together like pearls on a string, and the pearls aren't connected, and there aren't even any pearls. It's all just this. So you as you, you're not vacated. You're here as much as you ever were, but you are here as this is here. The presence of this hand in the field of vision, and the presence of those pictures in the field of vision is the same presence, and so on and so forth. in its way, reality is much, much simpler than all of our human intricacies, because it's one thing that happens in one way. It presents with an apparently infinite variety, so it's not obvious that that's the case. But in fact, experience is always experience, and it always happens by being experienced. And when you look at any experience, you find the same elements. You find experiencing potency, you find an apparition of characteristics that are instantaneous and are already morphing into something else, that are absolutely indefinable. And you look anywhere else, you find the same thing. You look anywhere else, you find the same thing. Look anywhere else, you find the same thing. Look at all of our structurality and all of our intricacy and our defining, and it all falls apart when you look at it, because what is it? What is it made of? What is thought made of? What is logic made of? What is imagination made of? What is memory made of? You look at all these things, and they melt like a mirage. And when you walk up to the water in the desert, it's there, and it's just there's nothing there. It seems to be there when you don't look at it too closely. But when you look at what's actually there, you find the same thing. You find this fact of radiant presence, the fact of experiential characteristics miraculously appearing instantaneously. And once you tune into recognizing that, it becomes clearer and clearer and more obvious and more self-verifying. And it basically, it's the common denominator. Everything resolves into that. It's without being negated. You don't need to negate anything, because everything is already just that. So you can have all your intricacies and all your investments and all your emotional entanglements and all of that, because none of that is actually anything other than this instantaneous, self-perpetuating, miraculous whatever. So there's no contradiction.
The baggage is irrelevant.
Yeah, because the baggage is actually the transcendental. It doesn't actually exist. It pretends it exists, and it thinks it exists. It's its claim. I exist. It's like, yeah, right. Good luck with that. And seeing that is liberation. And it's not even that hard to see. It's only hard to. It's let's say it's completely accessible to everyone. It's mainly hard to see because we don't want to, because we're so invested in our soap opera. Reality is very easy to see, very easy to find, but unreality is very hard to let go of.
Yeah.
But it's but it's us, in a sense, that are doing the not letting go. But even that is always taking place in the context of this. Even that.
Yeah, the tightening is the same.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
Yeah. And since that's the case, that is noticeable, that's observable, that's discoverable. And that very discovery, even if it's just an instantaneous, oh wow, and then you drop it and go back to your soap opera, even that is still powerful.
Yeah.
It's liberating.
Yeah.
Because it's cumulative. Every time you get an intimation of that, it's like a little slightly it's like getting a little bit of rust or something. It's like a small little hole in a boat. Doesn't have to be very big, but sooner or later the boat's going down.
There goes you.
So,
So you don't even have to let go of your your the juicy horror of your failure. You can still relish that all you
Well, in some
want.
way you can't, right? We still have these apparent lives.
Yeah, sure, that's cool, no problem.
Yeah.
But every now and then, if you have the wherewithal, if you have the wit, just glance over and check out what experience is. Just a little hit, just a little wow. Just look at a beautiful sunset. Or smell an amazing smell, or listen to a piece of music, and just feel it, just without defining it. Or even if you are defining it, at the same time, notice the lusciousness of the textures that are present, the experiential textures, and that is completely beyond anything you can define.
Well, yeah, and having been in this context with you, I have had the experience of the noticing, you could say, of just anything like a human voice coming through the radio and ordinary,
Yeah, anything, and just
But
getting
the same thing, of course, can be turned into.
Of course.
When you're in the.
Yeah.
Can be turned into just this dull.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also the idea, since it's just making me think of this other idea, which kind of moves all the way back to, a spiritual practice or community or whatever. I mean, just as a backstory, I don't know if this means anything to you, but I started getting associated with, and not so different than what you're saying, but with Darfree John, do you know who he was?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, so way back when I was like 19 or something. So, I don't know, I feel forever affected by that in some way I can't explain. So I got off the track here. I was trying to actually get at. So I got into this biography story. It was, I can't remember. Just lost it. Yeah.
amazing how that happens, though.
Which part?
It's a nice metaphor for how ephemeral and unreal our imagination is.
Yeah.
It happens to me all the time where I'll go into a thought of something, and I'm making it up as I go along in a sense, or it's being made up as it goes along, but it's so unreal that it dissipates on its own, and you can see that as a metaphor for seeing that this is that.
This is that, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is that idea.
When you get to the what was I saying?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, it's like, what was I seeing? What was I doing? Who am I? Where am I? I mean, it's all the same.
Oh, so it's progress.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, cluelessness. Yeah, cluelessness. The natural deterioration of mentality as one ages. Who knew?
Yes.
Who knew?
Isn't it wonderful?
A great yogic achievement.
It's a great
I can't remember who I am or where I live. Congratulations.
It's a whole new spin. I'm getting a little older. Losing it. You're actually losing it.
Sounds great.
Doesn't it?
Very refreshing perspective, yeah.
Well, you know, losing it is only a problem if you think you shouldn't be.
Right.
It's the thought that it shouldn't be like that that is the problem. The condition itself is just another experiential condition, you know, another indefinable who knows what.
Right, and but there's the horror, right, of the horror of the idea of dementia.
Right, but that's an idea, and the horror exists in the idea that you're losing something
Right.
that you shouldn't be losing,
Right.
or that it could be different, or this or that. All of which is totally imaginary.
Right.
I mean, it's defined into existence. Reality itself isn't saying that. Reality just it says whatever it's doing.
Right. And the Alzheimer's patient is still present to their experience, whatever.
Oh,
Of
absolutely.
course,
Yeah.
it's just a
Right.
different.
Just that
It's like
fleeting.
when you're in deep sleep, you could say you're completely dysfunctional from the waking state point of view, but you actually haven't lost anything.
No, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, when you go to sleep, you don't feel like, oh no, I'm losing my life. You don't feel like that. It's like, oh, how nice, you know, you let go of everything, right? I mean, it's luxurious. And everything, you know, the next experience is always like that, whatever it is, because you're letting go of wherever you are into whatever it is, whether it's going to sleep or whether it's walking into another room or whether it's having a thought popping into your head. I mean, whatever, or turning your head and seeing something. It's like, I didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And there it is. And what is it? I don't know, but it's already a doorway into something else. You know, you're always transitioning into a transition, into a transition, into a transition. There's no finality. And you don't know what any of it is, and it's already something else anyway. So how important is it, what it is? I mean, you can just look at the rapidity of experiential development. I mean, watch how rapidly, how instantaneously what you experience is morphs into something else. You know, I mean, it's literally instantaneous, and so whatever you're experiencing is already gone, never to return. You're never going to have that experience again. I mean, that's actually fairly easy to see just mechanically, and look at that. You can trip on it because try and find anything other than that. Everything, you know, thought, physical sensation, whatever. It's always this, just you know, just this flash that's already something else, which is a flash that's already something else, etc., forever. And it never recurs. You can't have the same, you know, you can't go home again. You can't have the same experience twice. And that's very obvious. I mean, you know, it doesn't take a lot of, you know, focus of attention to notice that. And when you do, there's no limit to how profoundly you can play with that. I mean, you can't ever resolve it, but nothing is resolvable, you know. But you can, you know, but still in all, you can be with it very, very intimately and get how weird it is. I mean, it's very easy to destroy any fantasies of normalcy or dullness just by looking at something like that. Look at the flow of time, you know, look at the flow of change. And I mean, it's just endlessly, it's infinitely weird and very obviously so. So your experience itself is always revealing, really rubbing your nose in the fact of how wrong you are about it. You know, and all of your orientation and your defining it to the contrary has to be actively recreated moment by moment. Whereas reality is effortlessly and relaxedly disproving that just by presence.
Well, you can take it one step further than that, is that you start observing you, the you that you think you are. And you see that it's the same way, that it disappears, that it reappears, and it's never the same, and it's not what you define it to be, or anybody else defines it to be. And you can't pin it down to one place or one spot. You remember as a child, and there's a you you're experiencing as now.
Absolutely.
There's a you imagine doing something. And so where are you? And who are you?
There is that sense, though, of having always looked through the same thing, whatever that is.
But is that true?
I don't know. I don't know.
But the idea of looking through
Is that just
something,
consciousness?
yeah, the idea of looking through something is a construct. That's
It's
that's
a
defined.
construct. It implies a person with eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And whereas any of the basis for that construct is just present in consciousness. I mean, consciousness sees, and it doesn't. If you look for its location, you can't find it. It feels like you because it's always the same.
Yeah, it feels like
It's eternal. It's always right here, right now. This that sees.
So is that, I totally, I agree, you can't say what it is. Is that the same indefinable thing that you can't say what it is that you felt at 7 and that you?
Of course, it's eternal. It doesn't have time.
Yeah.
It's the eternal.
There's
But it's
where
there.
it of course it's there. It's real.
And we call
It is
ourselves.
real. It is yourself.
Yeah.
But it's,
But if you look closely at what it actually is, it's not what you define yourself to be.
Right.
It's what you really are. And in fact, you feel it. You feel it, right? You feel that is you, and you're right. That is you. But that is all you are. You are this sentient presence, and all of this accidental form that seems to appear in that is just its nature.
And are you the same? Is everyone the same?
Well, there's only
Presence?
you can't know because there's only you. There's only one sentient presence, which is you, and it may or may not be me too, but you can't know that because all you know is you.
no,
You are the soul God of gods.
but even
You are the
another-
soul,
This
the
is
soul
the
inhabiting
alone
every
exist
universe.
thing,
Of
right?
course,
Yeah.
But that's noticeable.
of course,
Going further.
it's
from-
empirical.
Going further from what you just said, the consciousness is this here, this now, this, but, and this is you, right? But you gotta see that this is you.
Well, it's here now. You
It's
just as
you.
much, yeah.
Because consciousness, all this is in consciousness, right? So
The-
this,
Well, something is
oh, no,
experiencing.
then when you start saying I'm
Oh, yeah.
experiencing, all of a sudden you're separating that from this, and consciousness
Yeah.
doesn't give a shit whether it's
Well,
Tanka or this need.
consciousness never shows up naked.
Right.
It always shows up with experiential qualities being experienced.
Right.
That's what I call the radiance. Consciousness is the presence, and what seems to be being experienced is the radiance. And consciousness never shows up naked. There's never presence without
There's always
radiance,
something.
and radiance can't exist without presence because the presence is the presence of the radiance. And it's easy to dualize them. It's easy to think I'm seeing this,
Right.
but that's a mental construct because you cannot find any gap. You can't find an I that is in any way removed from the this. Where's the this? The
No.
this, where is the this? The this is here. Where's the I? The I is here. Are they different heres? Look closely.
No, they're not different.
They're not. So the construct of, oh, well, I'm over here somewhere, whatever, seeing that's over there somewhere is defined into existence. It's like when you have a dream. You know, where's the dream? Well, it seems to be over there. And I'm in the dream over here. We're seeing it or running around in it, but is that really true?
Well, there it's it's so super obvious that it's the same thing.
It is when you wake up, maybe.
Yeah. No. Yeah. When you wake up, right? Only on reflection.
Yeah, or if you're lucid or something. And maybe when you go to sleep, the same thing happens. Maybe when you go to sleep, your sleeping consciousness can look back at waking and say, but that wasn't real. I mean, the waking consciousness perhaps can't remember that because it doesn't have access to the sleeping consciousness mode or perspective, let's say, whatever. But just like in the dream consciousness doesn't have access to the waking consciousness. So, but from the waking consciousness, you can look back on the dream, oh, it's a dream, wow. And then all of a sudden you can know a lot of things about the dream that were very, very challenging to know from within the perspective of the dream. Mm-hmm. But likewise with the waking state, perhaps. I mean, when you're in the dream, how real is the waking state?
No.
Oh, and when you're in deep sleep, how real is any of it? And yet, you are. This is. It's always radiant presence. It's always this miraculously sentient presence showing up with an infinity of experiential qualitativeness. What it looks like is infinite and completely infinitely differentiated and never repeating. But what it is always exactly the same.
That's the presence radiance relation.
It's fun to play with.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, that's the whole, this whole yoga is really just about playing with and tripping on your experience and just, enjoying how much fun it is. And you don't even need to do it very seriously. Everyone's in a blue mood when you're in a quirky mood. You're feeling a little, feeling in a cheery mood or whatever, or distracted, and you just sort of look over something and go, wow, it's really interesting. And then, you go back to whatever it is you're caught up in. And that's actually, in my experience, that's actually the most productive mode of spiritual engagement. It's a kind of a playful exploration, sort of very, very not dutiful, very, random. Do it when you feel like it.
You've definitely broken with a lot of the institutions.
Yeah, but look at the institutions. Just they perpetuate institutionality.
Yeah, no, of course.
They don't perpetuate noticing reality, by and large.
Even though some of the people on them seem to have that.
Well, of course, it's possible to realize the nature of reality in any context.
Right.
But it's a mistake to assume, I argue, it's a mistake to assume that any process is necessary or even helpful.
Why do you think then, just a random trivial question, that people who have woken up in the way you describe have frequently built these, organizations with structures and rules, and rather than the playful recommendation you're making, it does seem very different in that way.
Yeah, I think it was karma.
Yeah.
Karma is, in this context, what karma is the sort of the inherent nature of apparent energy systems, which seems to have, even though, on examination it can't actually be found, nonetheless it seems to show up. Flavors, yeah. The flavor of my nature, as it happens, apparently, is what it is, which could arguably be defined as iconoclastic and rebellious and radically purist, in the sense of really trying to get to the essence of things. Also, I'm a complete efficiency freak. So anything that's non-essential, I discount it. And in this regard, I have found any and all process non-essential. It's not necessarily an impediment, but it's liable to be an impediment if one unwittingly, literally unwittingly, or dully or stupidly, mistakes the import of these processes and thinks they actually have a value in themselves and gets seduced into, perpetuating that. And then you have all sorts of people running around, thinking it's more important to be a Buddhist, to be a good Buddhist and perpetuate Buddhism than it is to see reality.
Right.
But Buddhism is supposedly about seeing reality, but in fact, most Buddhists are much more concerned to perpetuate their status as Buddhists than to see reality.
Right.
And I look at that and I go,
It's like being a good Republican.
exactly. To me, that's crazy. To me, that's crazy. To me, it's like eyes on the prize. What's the point of all this? See reality. Where's reality? Reality is your experience. So here's your experience. Check it out.
But even the checking it out, there's a very popular thing now of this whole inquiry thing, and you could say that it became popular with Ramana Maharshi, but inquiry becomes its own self-perpetuating thing where you continue to inquire and never really see. You're just asking questions for the sake of asking questions.
But again, it can be a seduction into unintelligent process. But anything can be a seduction into unintelligent process.
We could tell what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes,
Absolutely.
Within that context, what do you do on your retreats? Within that context of what we're talking about, this either this noticing or this other world of institutions and all that. You do hold retreats.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious what you do. How do you facilitate whatever it is that someone comes to?
Not too differently than I'm facilitating this evening, I suppose. Although I would say I sometimes do more specific, periods of time, brief periods of time usually, where I'll do more specific, suggesting some people notice a certain aspect of their experience, or notice this aspect of your experience, or notice the way in which this is this, and so on. So it's sort of a kind of more of a guided meditation or a conducted exploration of the experiential field. But I mean, it's not too dissimilar to what we're doing now in a less specific context, because in the course of talking about all this, the consciousness is seduced into checking it out, into touching in with these things.
And also, I think the benefit of the retreat is that if you're there for several days in a row, and keep coming to the non-meditation time or the talks or whatever, you're being tapped on the shoulder several days in a row, repeatedly every day, so that you, in the course of just going to lunch or the dinner time or the walk with a friend, you're constantly being...
It's more immersive, yeah.
Yeah, it's more immersive. And that's helpful.
I mean, you come to a talk like this for an hour and a half, and then you go back to your life, and whatever that happens to be, and there's your life, and what do you do? Well, you do the things that you do, and whatever that is, and all of a sudden you're doing that, and you're doing that, and you're doing... Maybe sooner or later you go to another talk or whatever, and then you go back to your life, and so that's all very well and good, but the retreat is more like kind of equal time, of being out of your life and being more or less forcibly, or at least potentially forcibly engaged with this sort of perhaps more intimate looking at this stuff.
And yet your retreats are not like any retreat other than I've been to Hindu retreats and Buddhist retreats and Catholic retreats.
Well, I'm an anarchist, so
that's true.
they're anarchistic.
But there is that sense of immersion, and also you're surrounded by other people whose motivation is similar. In the sense
they're there because they want to be there
this.
for whatever they're onto it as, and different people have different strengths and different depths of experience with this stuff, and so on and so forth.
And people's questions trigger
there's a
spark.
Absolutely. There's a kind of a switchboard of a group gestalt of different ideas floating around, and that spark other people's ideas, and it's all stimulates the intelligence, always coming back to looking at this. So instead of just sort of spinning off and spinning off and spinning off, hopefully, if I'm doing my job, the spinning off keeps being oriented to this topic of this that is here. What is it? And then so it's sort of tuning into that.
I'm not trying to sell his retreats, but another thing about his retreats that I find interesting, because I have been through many types of retreats, is that there's an element of playfulness. There's always opportunity in the afternoons or whenever Peter's made room in the time for people to go off and fuck off, do whatever they want, even if it's going to town or go for a hike. And there's a sense of playfulness so that you can notice this in ordinary situations, in the playfulness of life itself. You see the playfulness of radiant presence, not just try and work it out and start sweating it, you know? It's like, if you're not having fun, you're not.
It's easy to get obsessive and serious with this stuff, which is largely counterproductive. You know, a sort of a light, playful, amused attitude is generally the most productive, the most efficient. It turns out, because a lot of being with this is about relaxing. A lot of being with this is about just letting go of this kind of structurality and just sort of having a certain element of free floatingness and sort of amusement and playfulness sort of are modes that resonate with that somewhat, it seems like. But one has to play with it for oneself and find one's own modes that seem to have a spark, that seem to have, click.
Well, there's something about playfulness. I mean, you see it in children. There's a spontaneity. And when you catch on to that, you see that life is spontaneous. Radiance is spontaneous. And it happens in presence, in a sense. So. That's really helpful.
There's a whole transmission that goes on that has nothing to do with anything that happens at the retreat. It's like that's the outer level. On some inner level, it's like, yeah, I went for 4. I mean, the first 2 days here, then those are not ones that take place that are not quite the same as. It was a nice long lunch break. There's no hikes or anything. But boy, after the first day, I was like, oh man, this guy talks a lot. and it's like too much, and it's overwhelming me. I didn't realize what. And so then I went to my meditation group, and I was like, holy crap, what a meditation. And then I said, I wasn't planning on coming back, but I came back the next day, and I went to another meditation group, mostly for if somebody asked me to drive them, and another one of those meditations. But I realized after about a week, it was like I wasn't being overwhelmed by all the talk. I was being overwhelmed by all the Shakti transmission, and it was more than I was comfortable with yet. so I was attributing it to. But I was really sensorially overwhelmed, and then after the 4-day retreat, was actually true. My life was really got intense. There's like a spiritual thing where the spiritual stuff is really cool, and then also the psychological stuff where all of this that go on of crap that showed up afterwards is also multiplying. It's been a pretty intense.
That's very typical with this yoga. When you begin to really dig into it, the shit hits the fan in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
You can have a lot of internal psychological stuff happen, emotional stuff. You can have external karmic kind of stuff, weird synchronistic things happening in your life, not all of which are pleasant necessarily. You can have health issues or events going on. And it's fairly, in my experience, it's fairly typical when people really dip their toe into what this stuff is. Life can get intense for a little while.
Yeah.
It does tend, in my experience also, though, it does tend to kind of stabilize itself after a while.
It's almost well. That's
Not
necessarily all bad, mind you. Necessarily.
A while can be any amount of time, a short period of time. I mean, we know someone who was just like, oh, zing. It's like, aha, oh shit, an instant. And some other people take some years, but they're not bad years in the sense they're more and more opening, or whatever you want to call it, or clarity, or whatever you want to call it.
Well, it's powerful. When you begin to dip into this stuff, there's a, you sort of plug
There's
into
so much.
the 220, and
And
whoa.
for some people, it's the other one, the 110 or whatever it is. So it's it buzz, and you go, oh, there's something here. And then you a little later and plug in again. Okay. But there's no wrong way to do it. It's just karma. There's nothing wrong with that. Effort.
It's just karma, and karma's a bitch.
Oh, I don't know. My karma is very sweet. Well, okay, it's been bitchy at times. I don't know. Almost just another way of saying radiant presence, actually.
Yes, it is. Mhm. Mhm.
Especially like riffs on reality. Like guitar riffs. Obviously. I don't know what I'm doing. That was cute.
One aspect of what's confounding about the nature of this is that it is inclusive of all modes. It's easy to think of reality as being beyond, and it being beyond something, beyond normalcy, beyond personality, beyond psychology. And in fact, that's not the case at all. All of these different modes coexist simultaneously, and they each present, perspectives and implications that are completely disconnected, have nothing to do with each other. So the personal perspective exists, and the transcendental perspective exists, and I mean all of this myriad of disconnected perspectives all exist, and there's no hierarchy. There's no degree to which one is better than another. Of course, ultimately they're all the same thing, but in terms of their implication and their sort of flavor, they're so, such apples and oranges,
Yeah.
and in particularly in the way spirituality is often held to be, it's easy to think of, reality is better than my personal mode, or better than my psychological neuroses, or better than this and beyond it, and somehow there's a that and a this, or maybe lots of that's and lots of thises. But in fact, there are lots of thises, but there's no that. So, and it all coexists. It's not, reality does not negate personality. Transcendental intelligence does not negate personal stupidity. They turn out to be modes of the same thing, and coexist quite easily. Again, which is an absolutely irrational, illogical aspect of the way this is, and it goes contrary to what one's expectations might be. So, you could say reality is just multitasking with an infinity of different modes simultaneously, none of which necessarily have anything to do with the others. And they're all viable perspectives, and they're all present to the degree they are. And it doesn't, and there's no so what, there's no implication, there's no ... that leads to something or implies something. Which is in my experience, it takes some getting used to or settling into, because the sort of unconscious expectation of, well, if this is this and that's that, and they're so different, there must be some kind of a relationship that they have to each other, or a hierarchy, or a map, or something.
Yeah. Well,
that's more real than this, or but actually it's not like that.
Well, I was experiencing this, what you're saying, directly I think in the moment where the room got very quiet, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm back into my kind of uptight, fearful, closed system, it just, yeah. So I was back. I definitely was in a hierarchy kind of mode.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that can be there, but that doesn't mean anything. And the fact that there,
no less reality.
It's no less reality, and the fact that is there to whatever degree it is doesn't mean some other perspective is also there to whatever degree it is.
Right. Doesn't negate the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
no
right.
Mode negates any other mode. Yeah. And especially the overarching reality, the overarching transcendental reality, which includes all, permits all, and doesn't negate all, and in fact, encourages all. It's basically doing everything. Yeah. No, anything. It's easy to, in all sorts of spiritual practice, there's fantasies of, my thinking is going to get purer, or it's going to diminish, or my emotions are going to this, or my this is going to this, and somehow that'll be, climbing a ladder of to greater purity or greater something or other. And that's hogwash. anything may change. Sure, yeah, your thinking may change. Sure, so what? It doesn't mean anything. It just means your thinking changes. Your thinking always changes. You know, the way your mind works now is probably different than the way it worked 20 years ago, which was probably different than the way it worked 20 years before that. But there's no implication. It's not like it's moving from some here to some there where there's some relative value assessment of the here and the there. You know, it's quite possible, and in fact, it is inevitably the case that when you find a realized person, they can be totally realized, and doesn't mean they're not a neurotic jerk, because those moods have nothing to do with each other. You know, realization has nothing to do with the personality. It's not.
Or the activity of the person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All that kind of thing.
And that's a big mistake in religious and spiritual circles.
Yes, yes, yes.
I encountered that as a very young child. I was raised Catholic, very sort of religious Catholic Latins, you know. And I remember questioning the whole notion of guilt and sin, because I remember thinking that sin isn't in the act, it's in the intention. Because I remember being scolded for doing things that I didn't even know they were wrong. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, how can that be a sin when I didn't even know I was doing something wrong? But then I noticed when I had a notion of something I wanted to do that I knew was going to be bad to do, and I do it, but I still thought to myself, well, you know, but I had that intention, and that's the problem there. It's not whether or not I did it. It's the thinking that you know, to me, there was something right away that was very confusing about the whole notion of religion and what's right and what's wrong, and it's all, we get caught up in the formulas and then the definitions and the interpretations and all that stuff. Of course, I was, it's very confusing for a kid. Mm-hmm. Racing whatever, whether you know what,
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter.
They're all pretty confusing for little kids.
Yeah. Even atheists.
Confusing for anybody, at any age.
Even atheists, because then you go, okay, wait a minute, but there's something ephemeral here, Mom and Dad. What do you mean? It's just solid ground. I have these daydreams, and they feel pretty real when they're happening. You know, so it's like, so it's just learn to see that it's all radiance.
So getting back to the
Oh, God.
being a jerk and being enlightened at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the positive is. It seems like that as you see more and more what we are, you don't have some strong opinions so much and don't take things so seriously. So how could you still be a real jerk?
Well, I would say in general there is that tendency. In other words, the more one knows what this is, that does have an impact on one's let's say inherent motivational nascent orientation or what have you. But not necessarily, and not necessarily absolutely. Because that's the aspect that I was referring to as karma. You know, that we were talking about how can a realized being then go out and set up some absurd organization that's doing whatever it's doing, right? Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, it seemed like a good idea at the time if you're an enlightened being. When some other enlightened being would look at it and say, "What hogwash?" You know, well, the answer to that question is that it happened to be the case that because of who he happened to be at the moment functionally, it seemed like a good idea. You know, he may have his ideas after realization may be a big improvement over his ideas before realization, but that still doesn't make them necessarily infallible in terms of someone else's aesthetic judgment. You know, because it's all kind of arbitrary. It's easy to look at, you know, why did some whoever do this and say this when it had such bewildering after effects, when they could have done something else which wouldn't have had the same after effects. And you had to be there. If you were them, maybe you would have done the same thing. And if you were you and you were there, then you would have done something different. And then someone else may look at what you did and say the same thing. Because ultimately there's no canon, there's no measuring rod, there's no basis for comparison. I like efficiency. So for me, I'm a strong proponent of what I consider to be to be very much short path, to be very efficient, very direct engagement. But someone else may look at that and think I'm a jerk and I'm misleading people and spinning off. I don't know. I should be telling people to do 100,000 prostration or whatever.
But even this tendency that we have to have this question about what makes a good teaching, or what's procedurally appropriate, or does it not make sense for someone who's woken up to be a jerk, or to be seducing people, or not, or to say they're the Messiah. It's all it's all happening within the context of reality.
Sure.
And in a way,
in a certain sense, it's all true too.
In a certain sense, it's all true.
Yeah. I mean, basically, for example, I am the Messiah.
Yeah.
I am God. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah.
I don't go around saying that because I don't think it's a very useful thing to say.
Well, you're not also saying you're you haven't also said that you're the penultimate manifestation of it.
I am the sole God that exists in this universe. Yes. In fact, that's the truth.
Yeah.
It happens to be the truth. Yeah. But it's not a particular. But so what?
Yeah.
I don't. To me, that's not a useful thing to say. It happens to be the case.
Right.
But so what? It's like, well, that gives me, that like gold star for you.
Gold star for you, and all the projection from everyone around you too.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of projections. Yeah. See, I do not think one of my strategies in terms of spiritual effectiveness is I do not think that encouraging people to generate all kinds of projections is particularly productive, because that's just liable to seduce them into distraction. My basic strategy is to try to downplay the implication of projection, so people are sort of more unencumbered to look around and check things out. I mean, some people who, do set up a devotional, set themselves up on the throne and they do a devotional thing and all that. I guess they think that that's a good path. And to me, I look at that and I don't think so. But, it's them versus me. Who's right, who's wrong? I don't know.
But then again, when you say about yourself, or what we presume to be Peter, you don't say that that's not true of all radiance, or, in other words, in seeing this and recognizing this, is true of whoever. In other words,
we're all the Messiah.
Exactly. I mean, either that. I mean, I'm not saying it very well, but you can clarify what you mean. You don't really. You're not. What you're saying is that you're the king of the universe, in a sense that all of existence is in your consciousness, and you know this to be true.
Yeah,
whether or not I exist.
It's the knowing. It's the knowing it that's true that makes me the Messiah.
Right, and anyone who knows it. Is true, is the Messiah. Yeah,
but I'm the only one that knows it in my universe.
In your universe, yeah.
So I'm Messiah.
Well, you have been known to acknowledge it in other people that you talk to who
no, for sure.
They're the Messiah.
It's I mean, check it out. Find that you're the Messiah, and if you find you're the Messiah, then you are the Messiah. You're the sole Messiah in your universe.
Is there a female Messiah? Like Messiah means male or female?
I don't know. I have it from Christianity.
Mashiach is the original Hebrew word that means the anointed one. That's the literal meaning.
Mashiach.
Theoretically, it's a male masculine word.
Oh, that's interesting. That's what Christ means too, doesn't it? Anointed.
What is that?
Doesn't Christ mean anointed too?
Christ means Savior. It's a Greek word.
I'll be darned.
As far as I know, I'm not Greek, but I'm Israeli, so I speak Hebrew.
Huh.
So I know Mashiach.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
I wouldn't give Judaism so much credit to think that they had a feminine version of that word. I don't think they did.
What would it be?
But
What would
if
it be if there was
they
one?
did Mashiach,
Oh, that's right.
Mashiach. That's what it would be. I mean, if I were to just permutate that word into the feminine form, that's what it would be. Never heard that word. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Anyhow, but the Messiah is beyond gender, so it's irrelevant anyway.
Yeah, right. Actually, yeah, by definition, right? So it's kind of silly.
But when, I mean, that's what this is all about. When you look and discover what is here, you discover the naked presence of the divine. I mean, it is what it is. There's not a sign on it saying God or divine. I mean, that's an absurdity. But in fact, what those notions refer to is what this is.
Right.
In fact. And that becomes very obvious when more clearly you tune into what this is and the way it is that. And you discover, in fact, that it is everything and it is you. And you are it. That's really what this is all about. And it's already, in fact, the case. So it's relatively easy to discover. You don't have to achieve some status where you become it. You already are it. So, I mean, God, what could be easier?
Well, you'd be surprised. Recognizing that is probably one of the hardest things. You gotta get rid of so much to try.
Paradoxically, yeah. Well, paradoxically, it seems to be very difficult to do, but at the same time, it's very curious that that's the case because it's a matter of noticing what is already the case.
Yeah.
Which theoretically ought to be pretty darn easy. But anyway, that's what this talk is all about.
I'm kind of thinking about the word, and I actually think that Mashiach is not the anointed, it's the anointed.
That makes more sense.
That's good too,
again, I'm just, as far as I can understand the language, Mashiach would mean anointed, and Mashiach would mean anointed.
That makes more sense to me in practice.
Yes.
I mean, that's the nature of an effective spiritual teacher is, they manage to effectively convey what this is, which is being anointed, and this with the only thing that exists and that is worth being anointed with, so to speak. Anyhow, it's quitting time.
Wait.
Wait.
Pam left me with a duty to ask you to remind people about
Well, we can
some
quit.
retreat or another, but I don't know when that is or
I'll
what
take
it
care
is.
of all that.
This is not